hear the submissions and understand what people are saying. So we do ask sort of people who are sitting in the public area not to make any comments or things like that, because it's important that we hear what people want to say. All right, so we're ready to get going now. So the first person I have is a up to 10 minutes speaker, and that is Elizabeth Eyre. I hope I'm saying that right. Elizabeth, please come forward. Yes.
Kia ora. Thank you for having me to speak. I'm not normally called Elizabeth. That's my legal name that I put on submissions. I'm normally known as Lisa, and you might have eaten those little tubs of hummus. Lisa's Hummus, that was my business, which I'm now retired from. Right. Now, we didn't used to put fluoride in the water that we used for making hummus. So I've been on the fluoride, the anti-fluoride campaign for a long time. And what actually alerted me to this was I was reading in a naturopath's office an article about fluoride and how when you water all the lettuces and all the things, all the vegetables that you eat and the fruit, especially if it's homegrown, and you have fluoride in the water. And I thought, well, fluoride is a medication. So if you're medicating people to supposedly strengthen their teeth, how can you have a different amount of medication for different people? Does a newborn baby need the same amount, you know, as I'm mulling up the baby food for the baby? Does it need the same amount of fluoride as somebody who's 6'5"? So I thought, there's something wrong here. So I had this nagging feeling for years before I actually got any further down the track with it. Then something else that alerted me to it was hearing Dr. Paul Connett tell me that in New Zealand, a bottle-fed baby gets 200 times more fluoride than a breastfed baby. And I thought, that's dreadful. And it's even worse in America, it's 210 times more. So this doesn't seem right. Surely nature would understand the balance that of fluoride, of natural fluoride, that a child should have. So I investigated a little bit further. And I looked at the figures around fluoride and when teeth improved. Now, two other things happened at the same time as when fluoride was put in the water, and that was we had fluoride put in our toothpaste. And we also had fluoride, an improvement in general nutrition. If, you know, while we have milk that is more expensive than Coca-Cola, maybe we'll have a decline in people's teeth. But really, a general improvement in diet helps teeth. Japan, for example, hasn't got fluoride in the water, didn't have fluoride in the water, and they have had an improvement in children's teeth. So it's happening worldwide. I mean, European countries, almost all of Europe's rejected fluoride. And now there's a really forward-thinking city, Portland in Oregon, has become fluoride-free. And it would be fantastic to see Hamilton do the same thing. You could lead the way for New Zealand, really. I mean, there's some smaller centres, but you're a big centre. And you could lead the way for us in Auckland, which would be really fantastic. So if fluoride is working topically on the teeth, why do we need to put it in the water? And does it do other things apart from hardening teeth, and does it harden teeth? Well, Dr. Paul Connett, who has researched it very thoroughly, and I believe he's spoken to you, he said that it only affects 0.6 of a tooth surface. 0.6 of how many teeth we've got? I guess it varies. I've got one missing, more than one. But it only affects a small child as their teeth are developing, and only a small percentage of that tooth surface. So why are we putting fluoride in the water? And as a counsel, I'm thinking, well, what does it actually cost you? Because, you know, I mean, we flush the fluoride down the toilet, we shower in it, we fill our swimming pools with it, we water the garden with it. Imagine the cost of that compared with if you really wanted people to have fluoride, which personally I wouldn't, but if you really wanted people to have fluoride, it would be cheaper for them to have fluoride pills at the age when they need them, or when they might need it, I should say, because I don't think they do. And I don't even use fluoride in my toothpaste, but for those that believe in it and want it, then it's there. So I can't see the point, because really all we're doing is actually putting industrial waste in our water. And you see, it's a bit like if you've got skin cancer, if you have melanoma, for example, it doesn't just stay on the skin. It moves around the body, doesn't it? And so if you are taking something for the teeth, then it's going to affect the bones. And I believe that a very small percentage of young boys can get cancer, a bone cancer, from fluoride. And is it really worth that 0.6 of one of our many teeth to strengthen that, and then we lose a young man from cancer? What's the balance here? What are we doing? Have we really thought the whole fluoride issue through really carefully? I don't think it's really been thought through carefully. And I really do firmly believe that it's become a kind of a stereotype thing. Oh yes, fluoride hardens the teeth. And it's just been accepted. And you've got all that toothpaste advertising that's really firmly entrenching that fluoride strengthens the teeth. And so that story gets transferred over into the fluoride in the water story. And it's not the same story. You don't drink your suntan lotion, you put it on yourself. You don't need to drink your fluoride. If you want it, you put it on your teeth. And so this massive waste of money, it is toxic waste disposal. I think this chemical, hydrofluorosilicic acid, is a byproduct of the fertilizer, the phosphate fertilizer industry. And you know what? If they don't put it in our water, they've got nowhere to put it. So there must be some pressure somewhere for us to be getting rid of that. So what a better way than put it in the water? But as a council, you're paying for that. What a rip-off that the phosphate industry are doing. I mean, it's not, okay, it's not even pharmaceutical or food-grade fluoride, which Mayor Robbie in Auckland very reluctantly allowed Auckland to be fluoridated, very reluctantly, but he said, well, it must be food-grade. But, of course, it isn't. We just get toxic waste because it's cheaper, because most of it goes down the toilet anyway. So I'm very happy to take questions, but I'm really just speaking from a point of view of common sense. The whole fluoride issue doesn't make sense. And nobody's really, well, there are people who've been really questioning it, but it's been hard to get councils and health boards to really look at it because of that overlying idea that fluoride strengthens teeth. And so many people in the public, so many members of the public, think it would be strengthening their teeth when they're adults. So there's so many misconceptions that haven't been addressed. So I'm happy to take questions
right, so are there
from
any
anyone.
Questions, councillors? No? No, okay, thank you, Lisa, for that presentation.
Well, I can go on a bit longer if you like, but I was just thinking if there were 3 minutes.
That's all right.
But probably a lot of it's been said by, you've got some really good presenters and people that are speaking here. And I'd really like to reinforce that. But it isn't common sense, it isn't financially sensible, and it isn't good for us. Thyroid problems in particular concern me because I have a slow thyroid, and I wonder why I have a slow thyroid. Is it all the fluoride I've had? So medical issues, mass medication, how do you give the correct dose? All of those things really do need to be, I think, looked at very, very seriously. So good luck.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Lisa. Very good, thank you. All right, the next speaker we've got is David Hazard. Right, hello David, how are you today?
Fine, thank you.
All right, off you go.
Well, good afternoon, Mayor and Councillors. I'm the Oral Health Advisor and Approving Dental Officer to the Midland Group of District Health Boards. which includes Waikato, and I thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. In April of this year, I made a written submission to this tribunal detailing some of my observations which have come from general practice in Taranaki between the years of 1973 and 2007. During this time, as well as my practice in New Plymouth, I owned two other practices, one in Stratford and one in Inglewood. And during this time frame, fluoride was introduced to both Stratford and New Plymouth, but not to Inglewood. The facts that I presented in my written submission, which are based on my experience and observations within Taranaki, represent a first-hand experience of the huge benefit to the oral health of a community that can come from the addition of an optimum level of fluoride. In the next few minutes, I wish to highlight some of the important points that are central to the issue of fluoridation. My experience in oral health now spans the time prior to the widespread introduction of fluoride to the present day, when sadly some local authorities have succumbed to pressure groups' demands to cease fluoridation. I witnessed the enormous improvements in oral health for those benefiting from access to fluoridated water, mainly noticed in the huge drop in dental decay over time. For adolescents, where the average of over 6 fillings per child, per patient, per year, reduced to less than 1 per patient in a time of about 10 to 14 years. And most of those 1 fillings were tiny defects in enamel that were repaired rather than the huge restorative undertakings that in the 1960s and prior to that time were normal in New Zealand. Those who either deny or overlook the tangible benefits of fluoridation and proclaim that it infringes upon their rights should realise that this is a community issue. With rights come responsibilities, and such groups as those opposing fluoride need to consider the effect of their opinion on the wider population, most of whom are grateful for the oral health measure currently provided through water supply. Yes, we do have rights, but we also have responsibilities to make decisions which are for the benefit of the wider community. The responsibility is all the more important when one considers the extremely vulnerable group which I am aware of daily in my current work. This group of young people has no ability to seek regular dental care, even though it is provided free up to the age of 18. This group will move into the adult population with high oral health requirements, which many will be unable to afford or even wish to seek. This is the group that the community has a huge responsibility to care for. Denying this group the right to an accessible health measure will have a cumulative effect and flow on as that group moves into adulthood. Oral diseases have many related general health implications. The notion that critics of fluoridation have that the 30% or more at the bottom of the economic and health pile should help themselves is as unhelpful as Marie Antoinette's incantation to the cry that the poor in Paris had no bread, let them eat cake. As leaders of the community, we have responsibility to see that all sections are adequately cared for. To those who say that fluoridation might be a risk and one we should avoid, my comment is that the alternative is undoubtedly much higher dental disease. Dental disease requiring treatment, and this treatment ironically involves the use of a range of materials as well as a considerable cost to the community. Surely prevention is better than cure. To those that say that some countries have outlawed fluoridation, examination shows that certainly some have chosen to cease fluoridation. And you've heard this morning that in Europe, where the question came from one of the councillors, that in fact they use other measures and fluoride is still part of it. But this decision has occurred under pressure from groups such as this council is facing now. Further examination of the dental decay history of those countries will often show that they never suffered the extreme levels of dental disease that was prevalent in New Zealand prior to fluoridation. Some also of these countries have much higher levels of naturally occurring fluoride ions than we have in New Zealand. In other words, they could afford to cease fluoridation. I'd like to make a comment about fluorosis. Critics will try to scare you, saying that fluoridation brings a disfiguring of the teeth called fluorosis. Yes, optimum levels of fluoride may increase minor markings of teeth to a small extent. However, rarely do these require any intervention. In my work over the last 5 years as advisor to the Midland Group of District Health Boards, I have had to consider some 7,000 requests for special treatment for the 50,000 odd adolescents and children in my region. Just 4 of those 7,000 requests related to alleged cases of fluorosis. Upon examination, I found only 2 could have properly been called fluorosis. One was from this city in Hamilton, and the other was from a small farming community which had its own water supply, unfluoridated. Treatment in both cases was easily affected by careful composite disguise. Surely far better than the disfiguring fillings that most of your parents had in their front teeth when they were teenagers. Councillors, please weigh the scaremongering against the existing health of the community over the 50 or more years that fluoride has been provided in the public water system. And I urge you to make a decision that is good for the community.
Well, thank you very much. Are there any questions? Yes, Councillor Bell.
You spoke about Stratford and New Plymouth being fluoridated in your time, and Inglewood not.
Correct.
Could you tell me anything about the differences?
Yes, it's all there in my written submission, which you should have in front of you to answer briefly. In my practice in New Plymouth, as I said, 6.4 fillings per child per year was the norm. We saw those children every 6 months, whereas today we only see children, or dentists see them only every 12 months. We took x-rays every 6 months. Every 6 months you found a new crop of serious cavities. That was in 1974. I've forgotten the date, it's written down there, I think probably you are about 1979 or 80, that was starting to drop off. And by 1986 it was down to 0.4 of a filling per child per year. In the neighbouring town of Inglewood, the same set of circumstances without fluoride, but with a crossover both from fluoridated toothpaste and the fact that the Inglewood children only had 8 miles to go to New Plymouth and could drink fluoridated water and drink the things which had been made in New Plymouth with fluoridated water, etc., etc. So they got a certain amount of crossover. Their rate went down in the same time to 3.2 or 3.4, thereabouts. You've got it there in front of you. But it was about half the rate. Most of those Inglewood ones were still tended to be much larger cavities, were requiring much more destructive work. Those people now, 20 years later, are probably having crowns. The children today that have those tiny ones will not have crowns at your age.
Okay, thank you, David, for that. We don't have any more time.
Thank you very much.
So thank you very much for that. All right, our next speaker is Mark Aitken. Just a reminder, presenters, that the time allocated does include question time. So just so that everyone's clear about that.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, councillors. I want to address some big picture matters to help frame the diametrically opposed information that you've been receiving at this tribunal and will receive. I want to set a context so you understand why the views are so opposite and discuss a framework for making sense of it and reaching your final decision. The information presented is under one of two approaches, either the public health paradigm or the environmental risk paradigm. Both seek to promote the public good, but are fundamentally different philosophies as to how that should be achieved. This is why you'll hear equally impassioned calls for opposing decisions. Now let's look first at the public health approach. To avoid my own bias, I will quote Emmeline Hames, National Coordinator of the Government's Fluoridation Lobby Service, the National Water Fluoridation Support and Coordination Service, calling itself the NFIS. As she says, all public health measures carry some risk, all public health measures. And in achieving the outcome, some individuals will be harmed. When you work in public health, you simply accept this as inevitable. So if I would paraphrase that, public health philosophy is to achieve the public health goal by the easiest or most cost-effective means, accepting the inevitability of some collateral damage. The environmental risk approach is that public health is best served by avoiding environmental toxins like fluoride and the heavy metal contaminants that accompany it, because of course it's unrefined industrial waste. This approach says that we need to achieve desired outcomes by means that avoid such toxins if at all possible. The environmental risk approach embraces the precautionary principle, which I'll return to shortly. The public health approach, as you may have gathered from the presentation this morning, is that it's kind of standing in the way. The environmental risk approach is consistent with the Nuffield Council on Bioethics stewardship model, which recognises the need to look after the less privileged in society, as our last speaker pointed out, and to balance this against the individual rights of personal autonomy and the right to decide our own medication. The stewardship model is based on democratic community decision-making, such as we have today, and the intervention ladder concept. Now, that intervention concept says that you first look for an approach to achieve a goal that requires the least intervention in people's lives and the least intervention in their rights to decide on their own medication. Under that intervention ladder approach, fluoridation would be the last thing you would use to address oral health. The first things you would look at are those discussed recently by Associate Minister of Health, Tariana Turia, which are toothbrushes in schools, maintaining effective school dental service, engaging families with that program, the Lift the Lip program in Canterbury. These are highly effective without encroaching on personal autonomy. Under the public health approach, fluoridation is their first choice, even though other approaches have been proven successful, and we heard that again this morning. For some bizarre reason, they are fixated on fluoridation. People's rights don't seem to matter. They are subjugated to their philosophy. Fluoridation is not the stewardship model, as many promoters claim. It is the paternalistic model of do what I say because I know best, which is eschewed by the Nuffield Council's analysis. Now, I want to turn to Section 23 of the Health Act, cited in conjunction with the Local Government Act by the Ministry of Health as authorising fluoridation. Now, I will make the point, Section 23 of the Health Act does not, in my view, authorise fluoridation at all, and in fact, whether it does or not is currently under review in the High Court in New Plymouth. I think it's very dangerous for anyone to say categorically fluoridation is authorised by that Act because they're potentially in contempt of court. I'm happy to take a question on that later, but there's a limit to what can be said. In fact, Section 23 prohibits fluoridation if it is likely to pose a health risk to the public. I'll come back to the meaning of likely to in a moment because the courts have defined that. Section 23 also encompasses the precautionary approach, and this is particularly important when you're considering the public water supply because the public water supply ultimately reaches everybody. Now, the precautionary approach says if there is uncertainty, yet credible scientific evidence or concern of threats to health, precautionary measures should be taken.
In other words, preventive action should be taken on early warnings, which we've had for many years now, decades in fact, even though the nature and magnitude of the risk is not fully understood. Section 23 uses the term likely to, where the precautionary approach uses credible evidence or concern. So whether we apply Section 23 or the precautionary approach, the standard of proof is the same. So what is the standard of proof of likely to? Now let's look at the... No, sorry, I've got things out of TV. Likely to has been defined by the courts as being a real, not fanciful possibility, but it does not require a greater than 50% probability. So if we look at standards of proof, 100% absolute certainty you usually only get with mathematical equations in any public health studies, whether it's for or against benefits or harms from fluoridation. You don't get 100% certainty, you're always working with statistics. So even in our courts below that we have proof beyond reasonable doubt, the criminal standard of proof to put somebody in prison. And let's call that 95% certainty on that scale. Below that we have the civil standard of proof, which is tipping the balance of probabilities past the 50% mark. Right. So let's come back to likely to. I just gave you the definition, a real possibility, but not a more than 50% probability. So where would we put that on the scale? I would suggest if we imagine we're walking home late at night and we can walk 2 kilometres through brightly lit streets, or we can take a shortcut through a dark alley and be home in 5 minutes. But we're in a kind of a seedier part of town and we're thinking, well, maybe I might get attacked if I walk down that dark alley. So you've got to think now, at what level of likelihood am I being attacked? Would I think, no, I'll take the long way around and walk the 2K? Now you might think, oh, 1 chance in 10, 1 in 20, 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000, I don't know. Probably depends on whether you're trained with the SAS or not. But somewhere in there is where you're going to say, no, there's a real possibility here that I might be attacked, and so I'm going to take the safe road and I'm going to take the long way home. So as I say, I'd put it down there. So this is the level of risk of harm at which, under Section 23 or the precautionary approach, you need to make the call, the vote to stop fluoridation. Now you might think that the dark alleys and the being attacked is kind of serious compared with the effects of fluoridation. These have got out of sequence. Oh no. Sorry, let me just see if I can find. Oops, there we go. Sorry, these have got slightly out of sequence. Death by osteosarcoma at the age of 17 is a pretty serious effect. Pat Tui showed you a seesaw of studies, and they're roughly equally balanced, some showing that there was a risk of osteosarcoma from fluoridation, and some saying there wasn't. If that's really the balance, then on that alone, your obligation under the Health Act right now is to stop fluoridation, just on Mr. Tui's presentation. But what he didn't tell you is that all those studies that said there wasn't an effect, there wasn't a relationship, didn't look at age-related exposure, which is the key point of the Basson study and the Cone study. Right? So actually, all those ones on the side saying there's no effect, you need to discard because they're irrelevant to the question. So on the basis of that slide alone, you should be stopping fluoridation now. Now, if I can just go back. So the standard of, equally, a newborn baby dying from complications of preterm birth is another effect that we see from fluoridation on very strong evidence. 3.3 deaths per year in New Zealand attributable to fluoridation on the basis of the evidence we have, and disproportionately Maori or Polynesian. So how do we apply that standard of proof of real possibility to look at the evidence you hear? When we apply this to the totality of evidence you hear, it means you do not have to try to understand the intricacies of every research methodology of each individual study. You don't have to take sides on who is right or who is wrong on any particular study. I know most councillors feel uncomfortable with disagreeing with self-proclaimed experts from the Ministry of Health or DHB. The standard that is set by the Ministry in this Official Information Act response is publication in an internationally recognised peer-reviewed journal, and at least 90% of the information you will hear against fluoridation, that is on the adverse health effects, are published in internationally recognised peer-reviewed journals, so they meet the Ministry of Health standard. So if you look at the totality of evidence and it largely meets the standard, the threshold of real possibility has been met, and the DHB and the Ministry have no valid argument against you. So let's apply that likely to real possibility test to just one aspect of fluoride toxicity, which is developmental neurotoxicity. And here we go. Is the same one?
I'm the Professor of Bioimaging here at University of Ulster in Coleraine, and I'm a medical pathologist and toxicologist, and my research over the past 20 or 30 years has involved looking at the effect of toxic substances on development in the fetus and the infant. This is generally recognized as an area of, or a period of life when you're especially vulnerable to certain effects. Nature has devised a system for keeping fluoride away from the infant, and we're circumventing that by putting fluoride into drinking water. And I think there are consequences. I mean, there's lots of epidemiological evidence now that, for example, it might affect the intelligence of the child, coming out of China, and that's been reviewed by the National Academy of Sciences. They say that you can't be absolutely certain about it, but there's quite a strong indication, and we need further research.
Okay, so not absolutely certain, but a strong indication, quite likely, that fluoride is toxic to the developing brain. This means that the threshold required under Section 23 under the precautionary principle to cease fluoridation has been met. And this study, this video was made before the Harvard review of IQ studies. And I would suggest that there was no one here promoting fluoridation who has any qualification to disagree with the Harvard University, Philippe Grandjean or Professor Howard. Harvard review, of course, confirmed that there was a real concern over the IQ studies and the neurotoxicity that goes with it. So it's not just the IQ itself and the lowering of it, that's one issue. But the fact is, if you've damaged the brain to lower IQ, you have caused a neurotoxic effect. And neurotoxicity isn't usually related to one part of the body, it's wider than that. So the IQ lowering, it should be considered more of anything as a symptom of a much bigger problem. And of course, there's a whole raft of other disease problems that we've discussed. Fluoridation promoters will try to insist that you believe that the hundreds of studies meeting the ministry standard that I've showed before are so totally unreliable that you should ignore them all. That they will try to tell you that there is absolutely no chance of health risk from fluoridation, contrary to what the head of the NFIS says about all public health measures. So when weighing up the evidence you will have heard, imagine that that is the level of likelihood that you think you could be attacked in that alley. Would you take the risk? If the answer is no, that you would take the long route, then the vote must be against fluoridation, whether you're applying Section 23 or under the precautionary approach, because the risk is simply unacceptable. It does not have to be proven. At one point, you do need to listen to the science, and just the science. Even though you don't have to understand the technicalities of it, you need to understand the overall gist of it and the balance of it. Not on endorsements by trained parrots like Plunkett, or the 3 out of 4 fluoridation lobbyists who in the World Health Organization's group that controls fluoridation policy. And do not listen to anecdotal statements by people who have observed quite correctly the reduction in tooth decay over the last 30 or 40 years and are taught to believe that was due to fluoridation, because it isn't, as you've also heard, and the evidence proves that. So I would also like to now just finally give you another perspective on why the promoters of fluoridation continue to do so in spite of the overwhelming evidence of harm. I'll leave this to Dr. William Hertzie, who's the president of the US EPA Union of Scientists. Excuse me.
It has nothing to do with dental health whatsoever. It has to do with defending the reputations of people who have been promoting fluoridation for years and years and years, and now find themselves way out on a limb and have nothing more to say except safe and effective, safe and effective, safe and effective, when in fact it's neither safe nor effective, but they can't change. They're riding a tiger and can't get off, can't change. They're riding a tiger and can't get off. They're riding a tiger and can't get off.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, councillors? Councillor Bell?
You said that we should listen to the science.
Sorry?
You said that we should listen to the science, and then you also referred to self-proclaimed experts. So as councillors, who should we listen to in the expert witness area?
So if you listen to the two presentations, you would have noticed the very great imbalance in the presentations that actually quoted scientific studies to support their view, and reputable bodies like Harvard University and so on, and those that kind of gave you waffle and anecdotes and very rarely quoted research. I won't say there was none in that second presentation, but there's maybe 5 or 10% as much as there was in the first one. In our written submission of 94 pages, I think it was, you will have seen numerous scientific references. They're all there to follow up on. Ultimately, yes, you have to make a judgment call.
Is that time? Is that so? What I'm hearing is have a look in the submissions that you've given us, which we have got here.
My point was, if you're seeing a totality of evidence,
Yep.
and it all meets the scientific standards set by the Ministry of Health, and some of that is harm, then in Section 23, you have to stop. That's the moment.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Right, now next we have two presenters together, I think, Will Moore and Paul Weedle. Are they here? Yes, okay. Is it just one of you today doing that? All right, you're both. Right. Okay, so just presenters, I know that everyone who is presenting has been advised by the staff several times that, you know, councillors may have questions, but if you take the full allotment of time with your oral presentation, that doesn't leave any time for any questions the councillors may have. So just think about that in your presentation so that we've got time to make sure if we've got any questions we can ask those. All right, so we're just going to take one 10-minute block here, are we, Jacob? Is it going to be a 10-minute block, is it?
Yes, I believe that's correct.
Okay, but we're going to treat it as a 10-minute block? Correct. Yep, okay, all right, thank you.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm a filmmaker from Wellington, and a lot of the times I'm charged with looking at the budget of things. So using the data from the Hamilton Council website and Paula Brown in your office, I've just crunched a few of the numbers here. And just looking at my handout, the arguments for discontinuing fluoridation in Hamilton City, the economic argument. According to your website, you fluoridate the water to provide protection against tooth decay. That's why you do it. Protect the teeth. In Hamilton City, each person in Hamilton, according to your website, uses on average 224 liters of water per day. If you look at the breakdown of that water usage, you'll find that according to most health organizations across the world, you're meant to drink 2.5 liters of water per day. And that's an average. Some organizations suggest a higher amount, some a bit less, but it averages to about 2.5 liters a day. So that means of your 224 liters that you deliver to each Hamiltonian, 2.5 liters of it is drunk, and the other 221.5 liters is going down the drain. And so that means of your water delivery, just over 1% is actually being consumed, and the other 99% is going down the drain. And yet you fluoridate the entire water supply for the protection of people's teeth. And so I've got this information from Paula Brown in your office, the actual costs broken down in Hamilton. And there's the cost of the hydrofluorosilicic acid, labor costs, maintenance, monitoring, calibration, and safety costs. And that all adds up to $48,500 a year that your council is spending. And so if you actually break it down to the percentage that is actually being consumed, actually being applied to the teeth, 1.1%, that's $533.50 that is actually going on the teeth, $533 on the teeth. The other $47,966 is going down the drain. And so you have to question the fact that the reason that you're fluoridating the water is for protection against tooth decay, but 99% of that budget is not being used on protection against tooth decay. And so 99% of your fluoridated water supply is being used for cleaning, for bathing, watering the garden, etc., etc. So of your $48,000 budget, you have $47,966 literally being poured down the drain. If you look on the other side of that handout, I've broken down some environmental arguments. And at the top of that handout, it's been mentioned here earlier that you top up the natural occurring fluoride to 0.75 parts per million. That equals 0.75 milligrams per liter of hydrofluorosilicic acid going in. So if you look at the handout there, of your water supply that's being delivered, 224 liters, 2.5 liters being drunk, multiply that by the 0.75 milligrams per liter. That means each of your residents, if they are drinking 2.5 liters a day, which I presume that that's a high estimate, but let's just say for our case of argument that they are, that means they're consuming 1.875 milligrams of fluoride per day. Of the 221.5 liters not being drunk, that's being used for gardening, for showering, etc., etc. If you multiply that 221.5 liters not being drunk per day per person by 0.75 milligrams per liter, that means 166 milligrams of hydrofluorosilicic acid is being dumped per day in the Hamilton region alone. If you multiply that number by the population of Hamilton, which is 145,600 persons according to Stats New Zealand in 2011, you multiply the population by 166 milligrams per person per day, and you get 24,187,800 milligrams per day, which is 24,000 grams per day, which is 24 kilograms of hydrofluorosilicic acid being dumped into Hamilton every day. You multiply that by 365 days a year, and you've got nearly 9,000 kilograms of this inorganic compound going into your environment. It seems somewhat incongruous. So I would just conclude that you should ask yourselves whether you want to be releasing that amount of this inorganic compound into the environment. Thanks.
Kia ora, my name's William. I live in Wellington also, and I work with Paul. I've been filming a documentary on fluoridation in New Zealand for the past 5 years. I didn't actually think I'd have to complete it because it was so ridiculously one-sided that I was going to flag making it because the fluoride-free side is such a strong, has such strong messages and has such strong science behind them that I felt that there was no need, and if anybody just read anything about fluoridation, they would stop the process immediately. It hasn't happened, and it's taken 6 years, but I've gone to 5 different submission processes like this throughout New Zealand. I've been to New Plymouth, I've been to the Kapiti Coast, I've been to Wellington a few times, and now I'm here in Hamilton. This is getting the message in New Zealand through the democratic process that you're going through today. I've seen it grow from, say, 500 submissions in New Plymouth to up to 1,300 submissions here in Hamilton. This, for me, suggests that this issue is a big issue in New Zealand. It's not a minor thing. When I talk to the Green Party and any other parties, they say it's a minor issue. You guys are having to go through 4 days of this process. That is a big issue. And that just means that people in New Zealand are waking up to the fact that this is actually a problem. I got into this because I had my first child, Tahu. She was born in 2007. She's been breastfed for 3 years, and she was lucky enough not to have fluoridated water. She now has no foot cavities. As of last week, she's never had used fluoridated toothpaste in her whole life, and she's never drunk fluoridated water. The second child of mine, she's 3, is the same. My neighbour across the road, this is all anecdotal, but this is what the dentist used today. The neighbour across the street had 11 cavities. She was under general anaesthetic. She has had fluoridated toothpaste and fluoridated water her whole life. So we live across the street from each other, and we live in Wellington, which is fluoridated. So in terms of anecdotal evidence, that was huge for me. and I spoke to her parents about it, and they were in tears. So you need to decide on an anecdotal level, but also on a scientific level, and you've got to realise that these people who have been fighting fluoridation, against fluoridation, have been doing it on their own back, on their own time, and with their own money. And the people who are trying to protect it are worth millions and millions of dollars to their, it's millions. You saw them lining up there. There's probably $1 million just sitting there today. And we ourselves, I'm having to take money out of my own pocket every time I come and fight this, and I'm sick of it. It has to go. Cheers.
Right, any questions, councillors? Okay, we don't have any questions, but thank you very much for your presentation and for going to the trouble of doing that analysis. Thank you very much. All right, the next presenter is Brian Burkhart. Good afternoon, Brian. Welcome along.
Thank you.
Okay, so you're a 10-minute presenter.
And councillors, you have my dissertation in front of you all, the councillors. You've got it all there. It's pretty simple. Okay. Before I start, the cost of fluoridating Hamilton water is between $48,000 and $50,000 a year. Now, the cost of putting a crown in an adult is about $1,000 to $1,500. When I was in practice, I was putting in probably 2 crowns a week, which is $50 a year at $1,000 each. That's $50,000. There's 40 or 50 dentists in Hamilton. The cost of the community of having dental treatment to these people who need it is horrific. So if you can reduce that cost to these dentists, and I was one of them, good on you. Good afternoon. I started dental practice in Hamilton in 1959 and had to deal with the ravages of tooth decay. Giving a general anaesthetic on a weekly basis to treat 3- and 4-year-old children with rotting teeth was not a pleasant experience. To see the result of fluoridation on children in my practice over 45 years was most gratifying. Having served and been a city councillor for 6 years and having served on many hearing committees, I understand the reason for brevity. Hence my short statement here, and hopefully some of the information I provide will be useful to you in your deliberations. For thousands of years, man has been plagued by disease. The 2 most common medical dilemmas are the common cold, which is still cannot be cured, and tooth decay, which is completely avoidable. The control of tooth decay is helped immeasurably by fluoridation. Over 100 years ago, it was discovered that 3 localised places in the world, one in the USA, one in Italy and one in Russia, had no tooth decay. Research showed that this was a result of naturally occurring fluoride in the water at the rate of around 8 parts or more per million. They also found that there was a terrific drawback in that the population suffered from badly mottled teeth. But at this level, there were no other health problems whatsoever. Further research showed that by reducing the fluoride level to under 1 part per million, the people had greatly reduced tooth decay, but no mottling of their teeth. Today, it is recommended that as a public health measure, the amount of fluoride in the water for optimal results should be between 0.1 and 1 part per million. It is a rort to suggest that fluoride is poisonous in the quantity used by this council. Fluoride is naturally occurring in our water. The enclosed analysis from the Hill Laboratories will show the amount of water in the Waikato River at the city intake is 0.372 milligrams per litre each day. The city council is actually only boosting the fluoride in the water to 0.7. It's already there. Trace elements are essential for health in both humans and animals. Selenium and cobalt are added to fertiliser in the South Waikato to prevent a life-threatening disease called Staggers in bovine animals. Iodine was introduced to our salt in the 1930s to prevent goiter. This was highly successful. However, modern chefs are introducing sea salt to our cooking. This sea salt has no iodine, and goiter has been reported to be on the return now. Folic acid and iodine are essential for healthy babies. Most things are poisonous if not controlled. If you were placed on pure oxygen for 10 minutes, you would die. Oxygen, you would die. As an honorary life member of the New Zealand Dental Association and someone who has experienced the effects of non-fluoridation firsthand, and on a daily basis to see the introduction of the already present element in our water in a controlled manner and see the obvious health results over many years, I strongly urge that the Council continue with fluoridation for many years to come. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Brian. So any questions? No, we have no questions, and thank you very much for your typed up presentation. Next presenter is Dr. Andrew Mackey. Thank you. So you're from the New Zealand Dental Association, are you?
Yeah, I'm the vice president.
Right, okay, thank you very much.
Of the Waikato Bay Training Branch.
Right, okay, thank you, Andrew. Yes.
Oh, that's fine. Sure. Well, thanks very much for hearing my submission. You've probably heard a lot of the information this morning from a number of the District Health Board members and Ministry of Health, but my name's Andrew Mackey. I'm a private specialist prosthodontist. I'm involved in treating patients that have more complex dental problems, and most of my work involves constructing complete dentures, implant therapy, and doing crown and bridge work. I'm the Vice President of the Waikato Bay of Plenty New Zealand Dental Association. I'm also a Hamilton ratepayer, and I was born at Waikato Hospital. I had training at the prestigious Fraser High School, and I attended University of Otago for my undergraduate training. I went to the Royal College of Surgeons of London and trained there as well, and then returned to Otago for my postdoctorate training. Probably my most important training is I've got 2 children, one which is 2 and the other is 4, and they are the most expensive and time-consuming out of all of the qualifications. So you'd have to ask, what does a prosthodontist do? It's a good question because a lot of people don't know who I am, but I say most people I'm a dentist. But essentially what I do is I'm the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff. I spend most of my day drilling teeth. A lot of baby boomers, a lot of people have had severe decay in the past, and the majority of the work that I am performing on them is usually remedial. And there's a reasonable example of what we use for stabilising the disease of dental decay. That's a fluoride releasing restorative material that we use because we know that it works. Again, full mouth rehabilitation, and a lot of people can't afford this sort of treatment most of the time because unfortunately our government can't support that. You can do wonderful work, but at the end of the day, the best thing that you have in your mouth and the cheapest thing is your own teeth. So at face value, what do I have to do with water fluoridation? Not a lot. In fact, I'd probably benefit if it was removed. But the vast majority of prosthodontics in New Zealand is privately funded. There's some HCC component, and there's a little bit that's covered by WINS or the local district health board. So as I said, most of my work is remedial. Most of the restorations that I place and the previous dentist placed and the previous dentist before that has a limited lifespan. They will wear out at some point, and they need to be replaced, usually with a larger filling or a crown. And the biggest concern that I have is how people belittle the nature of decay, because it is a significant cost burden going into the future. There is an ageing population as well, and people keeping their teeth for longer. So I don't think you can belittle the fact that a child needs to have a single surface filling when they're young. So prevention isn't only just saving the first filling, it's saving the second filling, the third filling, and all the other stuff that I tend to do on a daily basis. And I think most of us have been to the supermarket, we've walked down the aisle, and my biggest concern is that they don't just have one aisle for this stuff, they have both sides of the aisle dedicated to very, very high sugary drinks. And when you're walking down that aisle, it just continues and it continues and it continues. And through the results of looking into the submission, I went to the juice and beverage industry site, and I noticed that the New Zealand spend is $1.2 billion on soft drinks and juice. And this is a website of an industry which is obviously looking to promote its benefits for investors. But my biggest concern is the size of that number. Even though I work in a small business in Hamilton, the size of that number is very large. You could buy the motorway from Hamilton to Auckland and have a bit of change left over. So if you look at how many litres of soft drink we're drinking per year, 640 million litres per year. And if we assume that 3/4 of our population are consuming these beverages, that's around 213 litres per year per person every single year. And that boils down to about a bottle of Coke every day. And that's probably been conservative. So these aren't the only carcinogenic foods that we consume on a daily basis. Now, I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of scientific evidence here. There's probably more experienced people that have presented that to you already. But if you look at the numbers, the New Zealand Dental Association Fee and Income Survey in 2013 costs around about $1,650 per day to run a single chair dental clinic. And it's interesting the comments that a previous speaker mentioned about having to pay here to be on his own back. Well, I've probably lost about $800 by standing here. It costs about $143 to place a single surface filling. And this was the lowest estimate of decayed, missing and filled teeth that were prevented yearly in New Zealand by water fluoridation. And this is the 2009 oral health survey that was carried out by the Ministry of Health. Now this is the lowest estimate. The highest estimate was 279,000. That's how much it costs if you want a single implant. That's one tooth. I wish it could cost less, but it doesn't. And that's around about the average level of fluoride that's in non-fluoridated regions in New Zealand. So I sort of thought about my children and what other children that will be born in Hamilton going into the future will be faced with. More than likely they'll have a student loan. I'm still paying off mine. They'll have probably maybe a pension, we're not sure. The cost of living and debt levels will increase. And I think the removal of fluoride will probably just increase the economic burden for them long term as well. So you've probably heard from other speakers that it safely lowers decay rates, but it has ongoing benefits, and I think that's the point that I'm trying to make. Most people's diets aren't perfect. If we lived in a perfect world, we wouldn't have to do these sorts of things, but when there's industry that's promoting a $1.2 billion turnover, you know, we're not going to be, we're fighting a very difficult battle. So managed carefully, it's got minimal side effects that I've been aware of. I've read a lot of the literature. I'm not going to give it to you all today, but the side effects that I've seen when you look at the level of evidence that's provided and the materials and the methods of those papers, the ones that have a high level of accuracy seem to show that there aren't significant side effects. It's a tool that we don't want to lose because it's effective health benefits. So, and that's all I had today. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Questions, councillors? We don't have any questions, but look, thank you very much for your presentation. It was really clear and concise. I think that was excellent. All right. The next speaker. Jacob, just thinking we'll get a copy of that, won't we? Of the presentations people are making, they're going to be online, aren't they? Yep, good. Okay, the next speaker is Hayden Allward. Good afternoon, Hayden. Okay, off you go.
Hi there, my name's Hayden. I've been studying water fluoridation for over 10 years. Water fluoridation, it's good for you because it's natural, it's a nutrient, it's safe, it reduces cavities, and you get benefit from drinking it. Those 5 are just some of the many lies and myths propagated by the Ministry of Health. The history of the introduction of water fluoridation in both USA and New Zealand reads like a timeline of corrupt corporate pseudoscience, and it involved a number of corrupt, unethical people. Just look up Harold Hodge. These 5 lies haven't changed much since that time. What has changed is that modern science has exposed these lies. The incredible thing is that some people still repeat them. Let's have a look at these in more detail. Myth 1, it's natural. A lot of people state that fluoride occurs naturally in the water. Actually, I would like to challenge that. Water from streams naturally contains virtually no fluoride. It wasn't until humans started artificially drilling deep boreholes into the surface of the earth that people began to get exposed to fluoride. Also, just because something is natural does not mean it's good for you. Arsenic, lead, cadmium, aluminium, mercury, and many other toxic substances are natural. Further, the fluoride delivered to you is not even the naturally occurring calcium fluoride. It's a highly toxic slurry of hexafluorosilicic acid, literally a hazardous waste product from the phosphate fertilizer industry. The Ministry of Health would like you to believe that the hexafluorosilicic acid behaves the same way in the human body as calcium fluoride. They base this solely on one experiment conducted which showed that under certain conditions there is partial dissociation of the silicon hexafluoride, resulting in some free fluoride ions. This does not constitute proof of pharmacological equivalency. Myth 2, it's a nutrient. There is no biological process in humans or animals that requires a fluoride compound to function. This has not been disputed. You can have perfectly healthy teeth without fluoride. Myth 3, fluoride is safe. Actually, fluoride has been linked to many adverse health effects such as lowered thyroid function, joint pain and arthritis, increased bone fractures in the elderly, dementia and Alzheimer's. It disrupts the synthesis of collagen. It inactivates or inhibits over 100 different enzymes. It is a known endocrine disruptor. It has been linked to reduced IQ by Harvard studies. It increases cancer rate. A recent review in Ireland found a 38% higher cancer rate in fluoridated Ireland compared to non-fluoridated Northern Ireland. It's a known neurotoxin. According to documents on the EPA website, there are over 100 studies linking it to developmental neurotoxicity. Myth 4, it reduces cavities. Proponents of water fluoridation say that studies prove fluoridation reduces cavities. Although the dental decay rates in fluoridated countries have decreased, the same decline exists in non-fluoridated countries. Recent data from New Zealand shows that children in non-fluoridated Napier actually have slightly better teeth than those in fluoridated Hastings. Myth 5, you get benefit from drinking it. Any purported benefit of fluoride is primarily from topical application, not systemic exposure. The Centers for Disease Control report titled Recommendations for Using Fluoride to Prevent and Control Dental Caries in the US states the following. Fluoride's predominant effect is on the surface of the tooth. And I am told, Robin Wyman of the NFIS agrees. Thanks, Robin. You're finally starting to see some sense. So, how many people receive fluoridated water? Less than 5% of the world's population receives artificially fluoridated water, and this number is declining. 97% of Western Europe, as well as China and Japan, do not fluoridate. Recently, citizens in Portland, Oregon voted against water fluoridation despite the fluoride proponents wasting around $1 million on propaganda. Informed people do not want fluoridation. The minority of councils that continue to fluoridate are ignorantly doing so against modern science. So, how is fluoride classified? Because fluoride is not a nutrient, but it makes changes to the human body, it is legally classified as a drug in overseas jurisdictions. In New Zealand, it is defined as a medicine under the Medicines Act 1981. However, there is no listing for hexafluorosilicic acid on MedSafe. The medicine approval process on MedSafe seems fairly sensible. Some of the issues covered are, can the medicine be proven as safe and effective? Have proper clinical studies been carried out? Do the benefits outweigh the risks? Does the severity of the illness justify the proposed treatment? If the Ministry of Health claims that this is safe and effective, They need to back this up sufficiently to get hexafluorosilicic acid listed on MedSafe as an approved medicine. A large proportion of people do not want to be medicated with fluoride. However, adding it to the water supply takes away people's right to choose. It is, by definition, forced medication. When Sweden banned water fluoridation in 1981, the official commission recommended other ways of reducing tooth decay, such as improved food and oral hygiene habits, instead of fluoridating tap water. They also found that fluoridation impinged upon personal liberty or freedom of choice by forcing people to be medicated, and that long-term effects of fluoridation were insufficiently acknowledged. Do you really want to be more than 30 years behind Sweden? I have a copy of statements from representatives from most Western European countries regarding water fluoridation, and I will distribute copies to you. As it stands at the moment, the Ministry of Health wants to force medicate everybody with an unapproved drug that is literally neurotoxic industrial waste, linked to numerous health problems, using the justification that it is necessary because some people that don't take care of their teeth can get cavities. It seems crazy that the so-called Ministry of Health will spend millions of dollars on propaganda to promote fluoridation, but so far it appears has not even spent $1 on having the substance vetted for safety and effectiveness according to the MedSafe approval process. So, who takes responsibility and liability for water fluoridation? The Ministry of Health states that fluoridation of water supplies is safe and effective, but even given the opportunity to do so over the last 50 years, have failed to gather sufficient evidence to have hexafluorosilicic acid listed as an approved medicine. The burden of proof that this is safe lies with the promoter of the substance, and they have failed to deliver because they can't. Interestingly, the Ministry of Health effectively absolves itself from any liability by stating that fluoridation is an individual council decision. Therefore, liability is passed to the council members. Council members, ask yourselves this: are you comfortable with being liable for the adverse health effects of water fluoridation? I think probably not. If you vote to continue water fluoridation, you are acknowledging that you accept liability for the practice. There does remain one course of action that councillors can take to absolve themselves from potential liability, and that's simple. Vote to end the practice of water fluoridation in Hamilton. In summary, water fluoridation is ineffective. Any alleged benefit is primarily topical. It is unnecessary. Fluoridation is not required by the human body. It is unethical. Forced medication goes against human rights, and it's unsafe. There is a strong association with adverse health effects.
Thank you. Hayden, any questions, councillors? No, Hayden, there are no questions for you. Thank you very much for that. And I think you said there would be something that would be circulated.
Yes.
Great, thank you very much. Well, the next speaker is Dennis McLeod. Good afternoon, Dennis. All right, thank you very much, Dennis. Off you go.
I hesitated to come here today because I am not an expert in any of this field.
Thank you.
But we as lay people have been told we do not know enough information about this subject to make a qualified decision or vote on it. Well, I hesitate and say this is incorrect because over the last 10 years we have been bombarded with information from letters to the paper, letters, editings, you name it, they've appeared. And the public have been well informed. And most of these information come from people who are or have an axe to grind on this subject. Experts are experts, but we become experts, as the young doctor, from personal experience. I remember lining up every 6 months at what we called the murder house. Some of you may be old enough to remember them, where we had to get filling on filling on filling, and I still suffer the effects of all that today. But I also have the information of my children, 4 children, who grew up in Hamilton, who have near on perfect teeth. I have the information of 9 grandchildren, sorry, and they all have near perfect teeth. and they've grown up in the fluoridated areas. Pushed to say which I would prefer, I would say fluoridation. Now I know there's argument both ways, but in my own children, my own family, and in my own self and my brothers, I can see the advantages of this fluoridation. And just to mention, my wife comes from Oxford, and she says the Thames has more fluoridation naturally than what is required and is actually removed. We had a referendum on this subject, how long, 7 years ago. And something like 70% of the Hamilton population asked for this to remain in the water supply. But then we were told that only 38% of the people eligible to voted. So therefore this referendum was no good because there wasn't enough people. Well, I think we've been done a disservice here, because what has happened by those who are the anti, who are normally called the squeaky door, have managed to get it away from a referendum to a select committee. Now you can lobby a select committee better than you can lob the population. I would just ask the City Council that they would actually think again about having a referendum in the city, because surely it's better to have 38% of the people voting one way or the other on this subject than 0.02%, which is the number of percentage basically of the City Council compared to the population of the city. For that reason, I would say, please, City Council, let's have a referendum on this subject. And then both sides of the debate, whichever way it goes, go with that result, accept it, and so we can move on, because I'm sure there's enough money and time being spent on this that could be spent on much better things. Mayor, Council people, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dennis, for that. Any questions of Dennis? No, thank you very much. Right, the next speaker is Philippa Oxlade. Hello, how are you?
Hi, my name's Pip Oxlade, and I'm a passionate person to do with health, I guess, my own health. And I come from England. I've been brought up with fluoridated water in my water supply all my life. I'm now 49. I have 10 fillings in my mouth. I was always told to brush my teeth well, and you know, we had a relatively good diet. But what I want to say is that I'm really pleased that I'm on tank water, and I'm really pleased that I don't have to have fluoride in my water, especially when I realise that it comes from the production of steel and aluminium and fertilisers. It comes from coal-burning power plants and cement and glass production. I question why. Why would I want that product in my water when it actually doesn't help my teeth? And recently in the Weekend Sun in Tauranga, there was an article about changes in the US and how they have reignited a man's fight against fluoride. In the US, they had a level of fluoride which was between 1.2 parts per million and 0.7. They've adjusted it to 0.7. So doesn't that actually tell us something, that there are things afoot, that the Americans would reduce that level? I'm also the advertising manager for the Natural Medicine magazine, which most of you would probably know is quite an outspoken magazine and puts arguments forward, factual arguments forwards, and I'd just like to read this article which the editor has written. Fluorosilicic acid is an aqueous solution used for the fluoridation of drinking water. Fluoridic acid is the most widely used fluoridation agent in Australia and has several advantages over powdered fluoridation products, including the elimination of manual handling, dust control and slurification. Fluoridic acid is particularly aggressive and hazardous chemical and requires specific operator training and awareness. Fluoridic acid is classified as a Schedule 7 S7 poison, using the criteria and the standard for the uniform scheduling of the Drugs and Poisons Schedule 7. Drugs and poisons are substances and preparations that have high to extremely high toxicity, can cause death or severe injury at low exposures, require special precautions in their manufacture, handling or use, may require special regulations restricting their availability, possession or use, and are too hazardous for domestic use or use by untrained persons. So he says, so let me get this straight. The guy who wants this highly corrosive, toxic S7 poison acid removed from the drinking water supply of babies, kidney patients, the elderly, and so on, is a fringe nut job, whose views pose a risk to the health of the public, whilst those who insist on continuing to forcibly inject this highly corrosive, toxic S7 poison acid into public water supplies are held as leading doctors, authorities, and health officials. My question is, why is it that so many people have got enzyme problems, digestive issues? They suffer with arthritis. Why is our health of our nation not good? So that's where I'm going to leave it. So thank you.
Right, thank you, Philippa. Just wait and see if there's any questions first. Any questions from any of the councillors? No? Okay, you're good to go. Thank you. Now I've got the next two speakers are just something's just happening with my thing here. Is there someone? Is he here? Is he? No. Okay. All right. So the next two speakers have got allocated 1 minute, and they just want to make a simple statement about whether they're for or against. And the first one I've got is Steph Holmes. Hi, Steve.
Hi, thank you. I'll try and be short and sweet on this. I'm speaking as a dental surgeon with 24 active years experience in the UK NHS service. I was an assessment officer for 3 specialist referral clinics covering the majority of the Midlands over there. So we were treating patients from both artificially fluoridated areas and non-fluoridated areas. I'm afraid to say all the patients we seem to see had similar treatment plans, which was the multiple extractions due to massive dental decay. I saw no effect from artificially fluoridating the water, no at all. It's now reported that the minimal improvement from fluoride can be due to careful topical application, not a systemic effect at all. So artificially fluoridating the water is a complete waste of money. You might as well put the money straight down the drain. I question really the wide acceptance that the liberal use of chemicals will magically do issues. There's cheaper, safer ways, oral hygiene instruction and diet. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Steve, very much. Now I've got Peter Roberts. Peter Roberts, hi Peter. I've got you down as 1 minute to make a statement. Okay. Oh, I'm just going off my screen and what's been arranged, so that's what we've allocated you. Okay.
Hi everybody, my name is Peter Roberts. I'm Hamilton born and bred. I'm here because I'm concerned about the addition of this water to everyone's drinking. Both of my children, now young adults, have fluorosis in their teeth. I believe that was developed by the fact that they had fluoridated water put in their infant formula. for one thing. Second thing is that I was a grumpy old father and I wouldn't let them have Coca-Cola and such drinks. They had to drink water. So, and I've just recently learned that children's and babies' kidneys can't cope with fluoride. In a healthy adult, apparently about 50% of the fluoride can be discarded from the body. Children and babies, they maintain about 85% of it. I also recently had an interesting experience where I'm a retired engineer. I've worked a lot in stainless steel. I used to run a large stainless steel fabricating company. Oh, sorry.
All right. Thank you very much for sharing that with us, Peter. I'm just going to check now with Jacob. I've got two other speakers here, but they are not coming now. All right, just see if they are here. Okay, so I've got Cynthia Campbell. Cynthia here? No? And I've got Stephen White. Is Stephen White here? No. So are there any other speakers in for today? No. Okay, so today is now finished and we're adjourned. Yes.
Mayor, when I look at the time here, unless my watch has stopped, because we got through fairly quick, some of those people may well have anticipated coming in at 3:45. Right. So therefore, I think unless we are waiting,
no, I think they were down to come earlier.
Submitters have been brought in blocks, so there was a 3 till 4 block, and submitters didn't know where they were, so all asked to be in 4:3 for the 3 till 4.
Okay, well I wasn't aware of that. That's fine.
So just checking, because it's a good point you raised. So you're comfortable that we could adjourn until tomorrow because those speakers would have been here. Yes. If they do turn up, then we will add them on to tomorrow, definitely. So now we're adjourned, councillors, until tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Okay, thank you.